The Vrexian High Council met in a chamber carved from the bones of a creature that had ruled their homeworld before the Vrexians had risen to dominance. It was a room designed to remind visitors that the Vrexian species had clawed its way to the top of its food chain through violence and determination. And the 12 members of the council sat in seats made from the skulls of conquered enemies. High Commander Thezok stood before them and delivered his report. And with each word he spoke, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. 8 ships destroyed, Supreme Counselor Krethax repeated when Thezok had finished. Against 4 patrol vessels. They were not patrol vessels, Thezok replied. And they were weapons platforms disguised as civilian craft. And they carried technology that should not exist. Should not exist according to whom? According to every intelligence report we have gathered over the past 15 years. Krethax leaned forward in his skull throne. So you are telling this council that our intelligence services failed to detect a military buildup of this magnitude occurring right beneath our sensors? Thezok felt the danger in that question, because someone would have to accept blame for this failure. And blame in Vrexian politics often came with a death sentence attached. I am telling this council that the humans deceived everyone, he said carefully, including species with far more sophisticated intelligence capabilities than our own. And yet you assured us that humans were prey, another counselor interjected. And you told us that our raids would face no meaningful resistance. I told you what the evidence suggested. The evidence was wrong. The evidence was manufactured, Thezok replied. And the humans spent 15 years creating a false image of themselves while building something entirely different in secret. He activated a display that showed the footage from the battle above New Bazan. Watch how they fight, he said. And tell me what you see. The council watched as human ships moved through the Vrexian formation with deadly grace. And several of the counselors made sounds of discomfort as they recognized what they were witnessing. They know our tactics, Counselor Vithras said quietly. And they are using countermeasures specifically designed to defeat our weapons. Yes. How long have they been preparing for this? Since the beginning, Thezok answered. And every complaint they filed and every diplomatic meeting they attended was part of the deception. They were buying time. They were buying time. And they were studying us, and they were building weapons to destroy us if we ever pushed them too far. Krethax sat back in his throne and considered this information with the cold calculation that had made him Supreme Counselor. What are options? We could launch a full military response, Thezok said, and commit our entire fleet to crushing the humans before they can bring their hidden forces to bear. And what would that cost us? Thezok hesitated. Our analysts estimate losses between 60 and 80% of our combat vessels. Silence filled the chamber. 60 to 80%. Krethax repeated. The humans have had 15 years to prepare for exactly this scenario. And they know everything about how we fight. And we know almost nothing about their true capabilities. What else? We could attempt to negotiate. Several counselors made sounds of disgust at that suggestion. Negotiate, Vithra spat. With prey. They're not prey, Thezok said. And the admission cost him more than he wanted to show. And perhaps they never were. And perhaps we simply saw what we wanted to see, because it was easier than acknowledging the truth. And what truth is that? That humans are something new, Thezok answered. Something we have never encountered before. And they do not fit into the categories we use to understand the galaxy. He gestured at the battle footage still playing on the display. They could have pursued our surviving ships and destroyed them all. But they chose not to, and they could have launched strikes against our colonies in retaliation for what we did to theirs. But they did not. He looked at each counselor in turn. They are offering us a choice, and I believe we should consider it carefully before anyone could respond. An aide entered the chamber and approached Krethax with visible nervousness. "Supreme Counselor," the aide said, "we have received a direct communication request from the human ambassador." Krethax considered this for a moment. Put it through. The display shifted to show Ambassador Yoon Soo-jin, sitting in what appeared to be a simple office with no visible weapons or military personnel. "Supreme Counselor Krethax," she said, "I thank you for accepting my communication." "You have destroyed 8 of our warships," Krethax replied, "and you expect us to thank you for calling." "I expect nothing," Soo-jin answered, "and I am simply offering you an opportunity to discuss how we move forward from this point." "Move forward," Krethax growled, "as if we are partners in some joint venture rather than enemies who have drawn blood." Soo-jin nodded slowly. "I understand your anger, Supreme Counselor, and I do not expect you to forget what has happened." She paused. "But I would ask you to consider what happens next if we cannot find a way to coexist. You think we fear your hidden fleet. I think you are intelligent enough to calculate the cost of a war against an enemy who has spent 15 years preparing for exactly that conflict." Krethax leaned forward. "And what do you want from us?" "I want you to understand something about humans," Soo-jin replied. "Something that I believe your intelligence services fail to recognize." "And what is that?" "We do not want to conquer you," she said simply. "And we never did. And every time we filed a complaint or requested a diplomatic meeting, we genuinely hoped it would work." She met his eyes through the screen. "We were patient because we wanted to be patient. And we were polite because we believed courtesy was the foundation of civilization. And we absorbed your attacks because we hoped you would eventually choose to stop. You were weak." "No," Soo-jin said. "We were making a choice. And now we are making a different choice." She leaned back slightly. "Earth does not want war with the Rexian Dominion, and we are still willing to negotiate fair boundaries and reasonable terms for peaceful coexistence. And if we refuse, then we will defend ourselves," Soo-jin answered. "And we will do so with the full capability that we have spent 15 years developing." Her voice remained calm. "I am not threatening you, Supreme Counselor, and I am simply telling you the truth." Krethax stared at her for a long moment. "You have one standard week to consider our offer," Soo-jin continued. "And during that time, our forces will hold their current positions and take no aggressive action. And after 1 week, we will interpret your silence as rejection, and we will respond accordingly." She stood. "I hope to hear from you soon, Supreme Counselor." The screen went dark. Krethax turned to face his council. "Well," he said, "it seems we have a decision to make, and in that ancient chamber built from the bones of conquered enemies." The rulers of the Rexian Dominion began to consider the possibility that they had finally met something they could not conquer. The week passed slowly, and the galaxy held its breath on 100 worlds. Species who had dismissed humans as irrelevant newcomers gathered around displays and debated what would happen next. Some predicted that the Rexians would launch a massive assault to restore their wounded pride, and others suggested that the humans would strike first before their enemies could organize a response. Almost no one expected what actually happened to Ambassador Yoon. Soo-jin stood once again at the center of the Galactic Council chamber. And this time, the delegates watched her with something that had been absent from their previous meetings. "Respect. The deadline has passed," the Dasari Arbiter announced. "And we have received no formal response from the Rexian Dominion." Soo-jin nodded. "Then I must inform this council that humanity considers diplomatic options to be exhausted, and we will proceed with defensive measures to protect our territories and citizens." Before she could continue, the chamber's communication system activated. "We are receiving a transmission from the Rexian homeworld," an aide announced. "And the sender is identified as Supreme Counselor Krethax." Murmurs swept through the chamber. "Put it through," The Arbiter commanded. The main display flickered to life, and the face of the Vrexian leader appeared before the assembled delegates. Krethex looked older than he had a week ago, and something in his predator eyes had shifted in ways that the other species struggled to interpret. I address this council, he began, and I addressed the human ambassador directly. He paused. The Vrexian Dominion has spent the past 7 days analyzing the situation we now face, and we have reached certain conclusions. His claws flexed slightly against the arms of his throne. We have concluded that humans are not what we believe them to be, and we have concluded that a war against a species that has spent 15 years preparing for our attacks would cost us more than we are willing to pay. Several delegates made sounds of surprise. Therefore, Krethex continued, the Vrexian Dominion formally accepts the border proposals that were presented to this council 14 years ago, and we will withdraw all military forces from disputed territories within 30 standard days. He looked directly at Seojin. We also request the establishment of formal diplomatic relations with the United Earth government. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted questions and demanded explanations, and the Visari Arbiter chimed frantically for order, but Seojin simply stood and waited until the noise subsided. The United Earth government welcomes this decision, she said, and we accept the request for formal diplomatic relations. You accept? A Kovasi delegate interjected. After they killed your scientists and raided your colonies and insulted you before this very council, Seojin turned to face them. Yes, she said simply. How can you forgive such offenses? This is not about forgiveness, Seojin replied, and it is about choosing what kind of future we want to build. She looked around the chamber. Humanity could have built weapons of conquest instead of weapons of defense, and we could have used the past 15 years to prepare an invasion rather than a response. She shook her head, but that was never who we wanted to be. High Commander Thizok appeared on the screen beside Krethex, and his expression carried something that might have been grudging respect. The humans confuse me, he admitted, because they had the power to destroy us, and they chose not to use it because destruction was never our goal. Seojin answered, and all we ever wanted was to live in peace with our neighbors, even neighbors who attacked you. Even then, Seojin said, because hatred is a poison that destroys the one who carries it, and we would rather build bridges than burn them. Krethex leaned forward. You truly believe this? I believe that the galaxy is large enough for all of us, Seojin replied. And I believe that strength used wisely creates more security than strength used recklessly. She met the Supreme Counselor's gaze without flinching. We were patient with you because we hoped you would eventually understand that we were not your enemies. And we were polite because courtesy is the language of civilized beings. And now we will continue to be patient and polite, Seojin said, because those qualities come from who we are, not from weakness or fear. The chamber fell silent as her words settled into the minds of the assembled delegates. But let there be no confusion about what lies beneath the patience, she added quietly, because we have shown you what we built during the years when you thought we were doing nothing. She smiled, and there was warmth in it alongside something harder. We prefer to never use those weapons again, but we will use them if we must. And now everyone understands that this is not an empty promise. The Visari Arbiter stepped forward. This council recognizes the historic nature of this moment, they announced, and we welcome the resolution of this conflict. Through diplomatic means, Seojin bowed slightly. Earth thanks the council for their recognition. She turned back toward the Vrexian. Transmission, Supreme Counselor. We look forward to working with your government to build a lasting peace. Krethex nodded slowly. As do we. Ambassador. The transmission ended. 3 months later, Commander Park Ji-hoon stood on a hillside overlooking the rebuilt portions of New Bizan colony. and he watched a diplomatic shuttle descend through the afternoon sky. The shuttle carried the first official Vrexian ambassador to human space, and the sight of that vessel landing peacefully on a world that Vrexian ships had once tried to destroy filled him with emotions he could not quite name. Lieutenant Isio Yuna stood beside him. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. The peace. Park watched children playing in the agricultural domes below, their laughter carrying faintly on the wind. "I think it will last as long as everyone remembers two things," he said. "What two things?" "That we prefer peace," Park answered, "and that we always keep our promises." He turned to face her, including the difficult ones. Yuna considered this. "You mean they need to remember that we could have destroyed them, but chose not to?" "I mean they need to remember that our patience was a choice," Park replied, "and that we chose it because we believed it was right, not because we had no other options." The Vrexian shuttle touched down on the landing pad, and a delegation of humans moved forward to greet their former enemies. "What happens now?" Yuna asked. Park smiled. "Now we build something better," he said. "And we prove that the galaxy does not have to be a place where the strong consume the weak." "You think that is possible?" "I think humans have been proving impossible things possible since we first looked up at the stars and decided we wanted to visit them." He began walking down the hillside toward the landing pad. "Come on," he said. "We have guests to welcome." And as the sun set over New Bazan, painting the sky in colors that no artist could capture, humanity took another step toward the future it had always believed was possible, a future built not on conquest, but on the simple truth that patience and strength could exist together, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was choose not to fight at all. The battle lasted 11 minutes, and in that time the universe changed forever. Fleet Captain Vorzak had commanded Vrexian warships for 40 years, and he had fought against species that most of the galaxy considered dangerous, and never once had he experienced anything like what was happening now. His tactical officer was screaming numbers that made no sense. "They are moving at acceleration levels that should tear their ships apart," the officer shouted over the sound of alarms. "And their weapons are cutting through our shields like they do not exist." Vorzak watched another of his ships explode on the display, and that made 5 dead in less than 4 minutes. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Those are patrol vessels." "They were patrol vessels," his officer replied, "but they have transformed into something else. And our targeting systems cannot track them properly because they keep changing their emission signatures." Another explosion rocked the command ship as human weapons found their mark. "Our shields are failing." Someone shouted from across the bridge. Vorzak gripped the arms of his command chair and tried to understand what had gone wrong. He had studied humans for years, and everything he knew told him they were soft creatures who talked about peace because they lacked the strength for war. But the ships dancing through his fleet moved with precision that spoke of decades of preparation, and their weapons seemed designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Vrexian technology that no human should have known about. A 6th ship died, then a 7th. "All vessels," Vorzak commanded, "begin emergency withdrawal. Repeat, all vessels withdraw." Immediately, the 4 surviving Vrexian warships turned and fled, and the human ships did not pursue. Vorzak watched them hold position near their precious colony, and he realized with sick certainty that they had let him go on purpose. They wanted witnesses far across the galaxy. On the neutral station of Varantos Prime, the Galactic Council had gathered for an emergency session. The Zari Arbiter stood at the center of the Great Chamber, and their crystalline body flickered with colors that indicated extreme distress. "We have received an urgent communication from the United Earth Government," the Arbiter announced, "and protocol requires that we broadcast it immediately." The main display activated, and a human woman appeared. She wore a military uniform covered in medals and insignia that most of the assembled delegates could not read. and her face carried the calm expression of someone who had made a difficult decision and intended to see it through. "I am Admiral Beak Yunji," she said, "Supreme Commander of the Earth Defense Fleet." The chamber fell silent. 14 hours ago, a Vrexian war fleet entered the Kepler 442 system with hostile intent toward the human colony of New Byzant. She paused. Our defensive forces engaged the attackers and successfully protected the colony. And at present count, 8 Vrexian warships have been destroyed while 4 others have withdrawn from the system. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. "I am contacting this body," Admiral Beak continued, "not to file a complaint and not to request assistance." Her eyes seemed to find every delegate individually. "I am contacting you to provide formal notification that the United Earth government is invoking Article 7 of the Galactic Charter, which recognizes the right of all species to defend themselves when the Council fails to provide adequate protection. High Commander." Thezok rose from his seat with murder in his eyes. "This is an act of war," he roared, "and the Dominion will respond with the full force of our military." Admiral Beak regarded him with something that might have been pity. "High Commander, your forces attacked our civilians, and we defended them, and I would suggest that any discussion of who started this war should begin with that simple fact. You have hidden weapons," Thezok snarled, "and you have deceived the entire galaxy. We have exercised our sovereign right to maintain defensive capabilities," Admiral Beak replied, "and we disclose nothing because no one asked." She turned her attention back to the full council. "For 15 years, humanity has pursued every diplomatic avenue available to us, and for 15 years, this body has done nothing while our people suffered." Her voice hardened. "We were patient because we believed in the system you created, and we were polite because we hoped our good faith would be rewarded." Behind her, tactical displays flickered to life, and the assembled delegates saw something that made several of them gasp. Ships. Thousands of ships. They emerged from asteroid fields and rose from the surfaces of barren moons and detached from space stations that everyone had thought were civilian facilities. "What you are seeing," Admiral Beak said, "is the true strength of the Earth Defense Fleet." The Kovati delegate made a sound of disbelief. "This is impossible," they said. "Your species does not have the industrial capacity for construction on this scale. We have spent 15 years building in secret." Admiral Beak answered, "Because we understood something that most of you have forgotten." She leaned forward slightly. "Peace is not the absence of weapons, and it is not the inability to fight, and it is not the surrender of everything you love to those who would take it from you." Her voice carried across the chamber like thunder across an empty plain. "Peace is a choice made by those who could choose otherwise. And we chose peace for 15 years because we hoped it would be enough." She straightened. It was not enough. High Commander Thezok was still standing, and his claws had extended in the instinctive response of a predator facing an unexpected threat. "You cannot threaten the Dominion," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I am not threatening anyone," Admiral Beak replied, "and I am simply informing this Council that humanity will no longer accept attacks against our people without response." She looked directly at Thezok. "We were polite, High Commander, and we were patient. And we absorbed your insults and your raids and your murders because we genuinely wanted to find another way." Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted. "That era is over." The display behind her updated one final time, showing the disposition of human forces across known space. They were everywhere, hidden in places no one had thought to look, waiting for a moment that their builders had hoped would never come. "Ambassador Yoon, Seojin will remain available to discuss diplomatic solutions," Admiral Beak concluded, "because we still prefer peace to war." She paused, "but make no mistake about what happens next if diplomacy fails." The transmission ended. The council chamber erupted into chaos as delegates shouted questions and accusations and demands for explanation, but beneath all the noise, a new understanding was taking shape. Humanity had been underestimated. Humanity had allowed itself to be underestimated. And now the galaxy would have to reckon with the consequences of that miscalculation. In his seat, High Commander Thezok sat very still and thought about wolves and sheep and the terrible moment when a hunter realizes he has become the hunted. Commander Park Ji-hoon stood on the bridge of the patrol vessel, indomitable, and watched 12 points of light crawl across his tactical display like insects moving towards something dead. Those lights represented Vrexian warships, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. And they were heading straight for the world he had sworn to protect. New Bizon hung in the view screen behind him, a blue and green marble wrapped in white clouds. And somewhere down there 40,000 people were going about their daily lives without any idea that death was coming for them. His executive officer approached with a tablet clutched in her hands. "Commander," Lieutenant Sao Yuna said, "Headquarters has confirmed the threat assessment, and they are dispatching reinforcements from the Tau Ceti station. How long until they arrive?" 37 hours at maximum speed." Park did the math in his head and felt something cold settle into his stomach. The Vrexians would reach New Bizon in 14 hours. His reinforcements would arrive 23 hours after the battle was already over. "So we are on our own," he said. And it was not a question. Yuna nodded. "Standing orders say we should evacuate essential personnel and withdraw to a defensible position until support arrives." Park turned to look at her directly and leave 40,000 civilians to face 12 warships alone. "The orders exist to preserve fleet assets." "Commander, the orders exist because no one thought we would actually need them," Park replied. "And I do not intend to follow orders that would turn me into the kind of man who abandons children to die." He walked to the communication station and placed his hand on the shoulder of the officer seated there. "Open a channel to the Vrexian fleet, Commander," he said, "and make sure you are recording everything." The officer's fingers moved across the console. "Channel open." "Commander." Park straightened his uniform and faced the main view screen as it flickered to life. The face that appeared belonged to a Vrexian whose rank insignia identified him as fleet captain, and his predator eyes gleamed with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. "Human vessel," the Vrexian said, and his translator rendered the growling words into something almost pleasant. "You are interfering with Dominion operations in contested territory, and I suggest you remove yourself before you are removed. I am Commander Park Ji-hoon of the Earth Defense Fleet," Park replied, "and I am responsible for the security of the New Bizon colony and all human citizens within this system." The Vrexian made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are responsible for 4 small ships that my fleet will crush like insects beneath a boot. And your colony is not a colony at all, but merely a collection of buildings on land that belongs to the Dominion. I am required to inform you," Park continued, as if the Vrexian had not spoken, "that any hostile action against this colony or its inhabitants will be considered an act of war against the United Earth government." "An act of war," the Vrexian repeated, and this time his amusement was unmistakable. "As if your government could wage war against a species that was conquering worlds, while your ancestors were still living in caves. I am also required to offer you one final opportunity to withdraw peacefully." The Vrexian leaned forward. "Human, I have destroyed 17 of your cargo ships in the past 2 years, and not once has your government done anything more than file complaints with a council that does not care about your survival." His teeth showed in what might have been a smile. "Your warnings are empty sounds made by empty creatures, and I grow tired of listening to them." Park held the Vrexian's gaze without flinching. "Let the record show," he said clearly, "that on this date, at this time, the commander of the Vrexian fleet attacking The Kepler 442 system was offered a peaceful resolution and refused. Let the record show whatever you wish, the Vrexian snapped. Because dead species do not write history. The screen went dark. Pog turned to his bridge crew. And he saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. Trust. They trusted him to find a way through this. Even though the mathematics of the situation suggested no way existed. All hands, he announced through the ship-wide communication system. This is the commander speaking. He paused to gather his thoughts. In approximately 14 hours, a Vrexian fleet will attempt to attack New Bizon colony. And they believe we will run because that is what humans have always done. He looked at his crew. They believe we are weak because we chose to be patient. And they believe we are cowards because we chose to be polite. And they believe they already know how this story ends. His voice hardened. They are wrong. He walked to the tactical station and entered a command code that had been given to him 3 years ago by an admiral, who had smiled sadly while handing over the authorization. Protocol Jericho is now active, Park announced. And all personnel should report to their combat stations immediately. Throughout the ship, panels that had appeared decorative slid aside to reveal weapon systems that no patrol vessel should possess. Engine housings reconfigured themselves. And what had looked like standard civilian-grade thrusters transformed into military drives capable of acceleration that would have seemed impossible an hour ago. The Indomitable was changing. And so were the 3 other ships in Park's tiny fleet. Commander Una breathed as she watched the transformation on her display. What is this? This is 15 years of preparation, Park answered. Hidden inside ships that everyone thought were harmless. He sat down in his command chair. The Vrexians studied us and saw what we wanted them to see. And they concluded that we had no teeth, but they were looking at a mask we built specifically for them. The tactical display updated as his 4 ships completed their transformation. And where there had been patrol vessels, there now stood something else entirely. We learned everything about them, Park continued. Their tactics and their weapons and their psychology. And we built countermeasures for all of it. He smiled. And there was no warmth in it. They think they are fighting farmers with sticks. The Vrexian fleet crossed another threshold on the display. They are about to discover what farmers do to wolves who threaten their families. Una stared at him. Why did we wait so long? Because we hoped we would never need to do this, Park replied. And every day we chose patience was another day we avoided becoming the kind of species that solves problems with violence. He looked at New Bizon floating in the view screen. But hope has limits. And patience has boundaries. And some things are worth fighting for even when you wish they were not. The hours passed slowly after that. Park used the time to brief his crew on capabilities they had never known their ships possessed. And he watched understanding dawn on their faces as they realized the truth: humanity had never been helpless. Humanity had been waiting when the Vrexian fleet finally entered weapons range. Park opened one final channel. Vrexian Commander, he said. This is your last chance to withdraw. The reply came as expected. Prepare to die. Human. Park closed the channel and looked at his crew. All ships, he ordered. Engage at will. And then the wolves discovered what happened when sheep grew fangs. The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward like a cathedral built for giants. And Ambassador Yoon Seojin stood at its center feeling very small and very tired. She had made this walk 47 times over the past 15 years. And each time the outcome had been the same. Today would be different, she told herself. Though she no longer believed it, the council representatives surrounded her in tiered balconies that rose toward a ceiling lost in artificial starlight. And she could feel their eyes upon her like the weight of ancient mountains. There were the Zari with their crystalline bodies that chimed softly when they moved. and the Korvathi, whose forearms folded in patterns that conveyed emotions humans were still learning to read, and the Mendari, who breathed through gills that fluttered with what might have been impatience or amusement, and there, directly across from her position, sat the delegation from the Vrexian Dominion High Commander Thezok, watched her with predator eyes set in a face that resembled a wolf crossed with a lizard, and his subordinates flanked him like soldiers awaiting the order to strike. Sejin activated her translation device and began to speak. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she said in a voice that carried clearly through the vast space, "I come before you once again to address the continued aggression of the Vrexian Dominion against human colonial territories." A ripple of movement passed through the assembled delegates, and she recognized it as the galactic equivalent of a collective sigh. They had heard this before. They would hear it again, in the past standard year alone. Seojin continued. "Vrexian forces have conducted raids against 3 human agricultural colonies, resulting in the destruction of infrastructure that took decades to build and the displacement of 12,000 civilians." She paused to let the number settle into their minds. They have disrupted 17 trade convoys operating in neutral space, causing economic damage that we estimate at 400 million galactic credits. Another pause. And 6 weeks ago, a Vrexian warship destroyed the research vessel Starlight Horizon while it conducted peaceful scientific observations of the Andara Nebula. She felt her voice catch slightly on those words, because 23 scientists had died on that ship, and she had known some of them personally. "The Starlight Horizon carried no weapons," she said quietly, "and it posed no threat to anyone." High Commander Thezok rose from his seat, and the movement silenced the chamber more effectively than any call for order. "The Council recognizes the representative of the Vrexian Dominion," announced the Dasari Arbiter. Their voice, like wind chimes in a storm, Thezok's translator rendered his growling speech into smooth galactic standard. "The humans speak of aggression as if they understand the word," he said, and amusement colored his tone like blood in water. "But they do not understand what aggression truly means." He gestured toward Seojin with one clawed hand. "They arrived in this galaxy barely 2 centuries ago, infants stumbling into a gathering of elders, and they claimed worlds that sit within territories the Vrexian Dominion has patrolled for 10,000 years. Seojin kept her expression neutral, though her hands wanted to form fists at her sides. "We do not recognize their claims," Thezok continued, "because their claims are not valid. And we do not answer complaints from species who lack the strength to enforce their own borders." He sat down with the satisfied air of someone who had delivered an unanswerable argument. The Zari Arbiter turned their crystalline head toward Seojin. "Does the human representative wish to respond?" Seojin took a breath and let it out slowly. "Would simply remind the Council," she said, "that human colonial claims were registered and approved through proper galactic procedures, and that the Vrexian Dominion raised no objections during the standard review period." "Procedures," Thezok snorted. "Written by species who have forgotten what it means to hunt." The Kovathi delegate shifted their forearms into a pattern that Seojin had learned indicated a desire to speak. "The Council recognizes the Korvathi representative. This body has heard these arguments many times," the Korvathi said in their clicking language, "and we suggest that the matter be tabled for further study, as additional information may clarify the disputed territorial boundaries." Seojin closed her eyes for just a moment. "Further study." That phrase had become a tomb where human complaints went to die. The vote proceeded quickly, and the result surprised no one. 15 species voted to table the matter, 3 abstained, none supported immediate action. The Zari Arbiter announced the decision with the mechanical precision of someone who had delivered identical rulings many times before. The Council will revisit this matter at the next scheduled session, and both parties are encouraged to pursue bilateral negotiations in the interim. Seojin bowed her head in acknowledgement. I thank the Council for their time and consideration, she said, and her voice remained steady despite everything. And I request that the formal record note humanity's continued commitment to peaceful resolution of this dispute through proper diplomatic channels. She gathered her materials and turned to leave. And she could feel the confusion radiating from several delegations like heat. From a dying star they expected anger, they expected threats, they expected the theatrical outbursts that younger species often displayed when the galaxy refused to accommodate their demands instead. She walked with quiet dignity toward the chamber exit, and her aide fell into step beside her. Quan Minji was young and still believed that justice meant something in places like this. And Seojin envied her that belief, even as she mourned its inevitable death. Ambassador, Minji said once they had passed through the security barriers and into the corridor beyond. How can you remain so calm after what just happened? Seojin kept walking. What would anger accomplish? It would show them that we will not accept this treatment forever. Would it? Seojin asked. And the question carried no mockery, only genuine curiosity. Or would it simply confirm what they already believe about us? Minji struggled to form a response. The Rexians see us as prey, Seojin continued, and prey that snarls is still prey. Just prey that has forgotten its place, so we do nothing. Seojin stopped walking and turned to face her aide directly. We have done everything, she said, and we have done it correctly. And we have documented every step so that no one can ever claim we failed to try. Minji frowned. Tried to do what? To be what they wanted us to be, Seojin answered. Patient and polite and willing to absorb insults in the name of peace. She resumed walking. But patience is not weakness, Minji, and politeness is not surrender. And both of them are choices that we make because we hope they will work. And if they stop working? Seojin reached the entrance to the human diplomatic compound and pressed her palm against the security scanner. Then we make different choices. The door slid open, and she stepped inside, and Minji followed with questions still forming on her lips. They never reached her tongue. Priority alert flashed across the compound's main display screen, and the words burned themselves into Seojin's memory like brands. Pressed into flesh, Rexian fleet detected entering the Kepler 442 system, 12 warships on approach vector toward New Bizan. Calamy estimated arrival in 14 standard hours. Seojin stood very still for a long moment. 40,000 people lived on New Bizan, and most of them were farmers who had never seen a weapon fired in anger. And the colony's defense garrison consisted of 4 patrol vessels that existed mainly to chase away pirates. Ambassador, Minji whispered. What do we do? Seojin turned away from the screen. We inform Earth, she said. And then we wait. Wait for what? Seojin did not answer, because the answer would not make sense to someone who still believed the galaxy operated on principles rather than power. But somewhere deep in the administrative networks of human space, a message was already traveling toward people who had spent 15 years preparing for exactly this moment. Rexians thought they were hunting prey. They were about to learn otherwise.